just some quick introductions on where I've come from. So how did I get here? I actually graduated about 18 years ago and started off in a computer science and information systems program of study at school. So I was really involved very early on with internet technology and programming and sort of hacking around the internet, probably just around the time the World Wide Web started in 1994. I was still in school, so it was a really great time to experiment. And ultimately spent the bulk of my studies focused on really building up a foundation in computer science, as well as some of the business disciplines that were ultimately going to be important for me going forward. I think one of the key decision points that I was presented with back in 1997, as with many of our time, was a conscious decision that I made to actually go into Wall Street. Living in New York, it was much easier, and one of the options and career paths for us living in New York was to make the move onto Wall Street. Significant technology investments were always part of the theme of Wall Street, and that's something that I made a choice to move into Wall Street instead of the dot-com era and the dot-com boom. In hindsight, it was probably a great decision because three or 4 years later, clearly many of those dot-com companies that I had actually interviewed for didn't exist anymore, and some of those folks came back to Wall Street. So in hindsight, it was probably a good decision. Over the course of about 10 years after graduating school, I stayed and remained focused on technology, building trading systems, building risk management systems, and doing that for most of the large banks and Wall Street firms in New York, as well as up and down the East Coast. And what was really interesting about that experience, the bulk of that experience was actually done as part of a small boutique consulting firm. So not a firm that you'd ever hear of in the market, but a firm where we took about 50 to 100 really talented individuals in technology, in financial services, and capital markets, and we brought them together and went and basically, as consultants, built this technology for these banks. And in 2007, SunGard, a much bigger firm, clearly much more than 100 people or so. It was actually probably about 20,000 people at the time, and clearly probably upwards of $4 to $5 billion a year in revenue. SunGard acquired our firm, and at that point, it was sort of an immediate career choice that I had was to continue on the path of remaining a consultant, building technology, applying what I had learned in school to solving the problems of the day and the problems that we would face in SunGard. But I was also presented with another opportunity, and that was to expand the role that I had, move into more of a sales and relationship management role, and sell and build relationships with clients around the projects and the technology work that I had already done. Right? So it was not necessarily something I sought out, but just something that just happened about 10 years after I was in the in the technology industry, acquired by SunGard, given an opportunity without really seeking it out, an opportunity to move into more of an expanded role with a lot of client interaction and much more sales-based activity. My current role is actually managing our global relationships for a new offering that SunGard announced about 3 or 4 months ago called the SunGard Derivatives Utility. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means later on today, but it's a really good example of what we think financial technology firms and how they're innovating and creating continued innovation in the markets. I think we've heard from all the speakers today that technology is something that continues to change and continues to transform the industry. We're doing it in SunGard. We're not alone, but we'll definitely talk a little bit more about what it means and what we're doing and why it's exciting. But first and foremost, part of my role is really just to engage with customers, educate, and help customers learn how to apply this innovative solution to the markets and to their problems. So I think thankfully, we heard a lot from the current speakers that have come before here today about the challenges that we face in the industry today. Interest rates have been pretty much flat for quite some time. In 2008, and you've probably read about this or at least experienced some of this yourselves in some of your internship work, but in 2008, the financial crisis actually created a huge sea of regulation globally that ultimately created really a situation in the markets that is still very challenging. And what that is the cost to comply with all of that regulation has actually forced firms to reduce what they spend on revenue-generating opportunities. They spend the bulk of that money on compliance now. And what happens, and what that's created is a situation where revenue growth hasn't been as dramatic or as aggressive as it has been in the past. The cost to sustain that revenue and comply with regulation to support that revenue has gone up. And there's a tremendous amount of pressure from a cost perspective on how firms do business, how they operate their business, how they use technology to support their business. And as one of the areas, and part of the areas of focus for some of the more innovative areas where SunGard is making investments and creating innovative solutions, it's really around this space where firms no longer have the money they used to spend on the operations and the technology that's required to run the markets. The area of focus really that I'm talking about here is what happens after the trade is made. So I know we've heard from some great folks that really talked about more of the front office or the trading activity. We're talking about what happens after the trade is made, and there's a lot of extra plumbing work, a lot of extra transactions that occur behind the scenes after a trade is made to actually finalize and settle that transaction. Now, the other thing, that's financial markets, but one of the things that I think we should all also be cognizant of, and many of us here that have been in the industry for 18, 20, 25, or 30 years, have also seen a dramatic change in terms of who the technology players are. So Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, right? I mean, the way that we use computers has changed dramatically in the past 10 years. We're all carrying around a computer in our pocket. The way that we buy goods on the internet has changed dramatically, right? So Main Street has changed dramatically through technology. I mean, it's hard to argue that Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, they're all primarily technology companies, but yet they're transforming how we live our lives and how we do business, at least from an end consumer perspective. But how does that translate to Wall Street? And I think that's really the crux of my presentation here is really to share insights in terms of how the industry is transforming. The financial services industry and the technologies that support them are transforming to apply these technologies to the problems of our time here. So SunGard is a big company, billions of dollars of revenue per year, thousands of employees globally, significant market presence, lots of financial services technology solutions. We've been in business for over 30 years. But by the same token, we see change coming in the industry. We see that proliferation of technology on Main Street. And we want to apply that technology and innovative technology solutions to Wall Street and to capital markets and to other financial services verticals in the markets. And the way we do that, and some examples of innovation that we've recently started to really invest in and apply, one of them is really pretty basic. We've actually created and instituted a thing called the Coder Cup. And effectively what we do, it's a codathon. And what we do is we create teams of developers inside SunGard globally, and they compete. In a very short period of time, they compete against each other to create new, innovative ideas or products in a very short period of time. And then they get together, the finalists get together in some city that we choose around the world. They get together and really compete for winning a prize and ultimately and some claim to fame about what they've created and how that might eventually become part of a SunGard future technology offering. Some other areas of innovation that we've started to explore using Google technology that Google uses for search and other properties, using that to address equity market reporting challenges, a thing called the consolidated audit trail. Just something that happens, once again, after a trade is made, but a very challenging big data problem solved with Google technology and SunGard partnering up with Google to really find the best way to apply that technology to the problem. Then the area that I'm most focused on personally is a thing that we've launched this year. It's called the SunGard Derivatives Utility. And what it is SunGard offering around its core technology that it's offered to the markets for cleared derivatives. It's offering operations and technology services, things that have typically been performed by futures commission merchants out there. And these are firms, typically, there are some big banks that do this. There are also smaller firms that offer clearing services for derivatives. These firms actually use SunGard technology, but they also have a significant number of staff processing transactions in and around SunGard technology. And the SunGard innovation that we've really explored here and started to invest in is to take and offer the same services that firms currently undertake today, offer those services to the street, to SunGard firms, and ultimately do that with technology in a much more effective way than can be done by any individual firm. So, and just to talk about it a little bit more, so about 60 to 75% of the processing that people do in the firms in the market that we're talking about, that's actually replicated over and over again across firms in the industry. And so part of the SunGard offering here is to take what those firms are doing and apply and invest in technology to do it more efficiently and to offer it across the market. And we think that's a really interesting application of technology to make what we do and what has typically been done by people to do more effectively, so those people can ultimately focus on solving more interesting and more challenging problems and letting the technology do the work, letting the industry ultimately become more efficient through SunGard's innovative use of technology. So what does this all mean for you as interns, as people looking at staring ahead at your career? I mean, I think the first thing is that it's important to really remain flexible, because your career can ultimately take any number of paths here. It's a journey, definitely not necessarily a linear path to where you're going to end up. I think it's very important also to highlight how important technology is, whether you come from a finance background, a computer science background, a legal background. All of the disciplines that ultimately that you bring to the table need to be brought to the table to apply technology to solving today's problems and tomorrow's problems. And I think most importantly, as you start to embark on your careers and making decisions about the first job that you really start to take, I think it's very important that you focus on a few things. Probably most importantly, it's really making sure that you try to understand and educate yourselves on how things have been done in the past, how things are done today, and ultimately how you can transform them in the future, right? And I think that's very critical. And I think, I've had some great success and have really some great career stories and experiences around and using technology to solve some of these problems and really transform the way people do things. And I think you all, too, will have an opportunity to transform the way we're doing things today and the way we're doing things tomorrow. And I think it just takes all walks of life and all disciplines and all backgrounds. So wish you all the best and good luck.